started. So last time we're going to do a bit more review today since we had a lot of people gone at CMEA. Just go back a little bit and make sure that we're covered. We started to dig a little bit more into acoustic phenomenon, and I mentioned two big theories. There was one that was taught for most of the 20th century, and then we figured out in the 21st century that there's this interactance. Does anybody remember these terms? We have originally when the voice source or the vocal folds function separately from the vocal tract. Does anybody remember what this theory was called? It's okay if you need to look at your notes. It's good for you. So when the vocal folds and the vocal tract function separately or independently, we call that what? Who would like to give that a shot? I'll give you, go ahead, Joy.
The source filter theory.
There you go, good. Came right to you, right?
No.
That's okay. So it's called the source filter theory. And this is, if you go to some books now, you'll still find reference to the source filter theory, and that's why I still cover it. Hey, June. She's nice.
Yes, I know.
That's not a one. Of course she finds like
There was
you got a whole puff cup back there.
sure ate it.
Sure, yeah.
Too many things.
How do you find the time to get Dutch Bros?
It wasn't me. It was Aaron brought. This is my friend Aaron. By the
I'm
way.
always so jealous.
Do y'all know Denver School of the Arts? Erin's one of the main voice teachers out there. She's also a phenomenal director. She's won awards in this city and state for directing Chorus Line.
Yep.
Y'all won
Sure,
first.
Bobby G,
Yeah, so she won the Bobby G. Her and her group won the Bobby G. Award.
Oh, slay.
Yeah. So you're amongst royalty. Yes. And so Aaron's kind enough to bring me good coffee. So we talked about source filter theory where we thought they were separate. And then there's this other theory where they interact. Who remembers what that's called? Who'd like to give that one a try? Go for it, Joe.
Inertia reactance.
Inertive reactance, you might see it sometimes coined as resonance inertia. And then there's another one where it's called nonlinear source filter theory. And they're all talking about the same thing. So that looks kind of like this on the second slide here. This is what the vocal tract looks like if we pulled it out of the body. And the biggest thing, if you get these two confused, is to remember that with source filter theory, they work independently. The vocal folds and the vocal tract are independent. With inertive reactance, resonance inertia, or nonlinear source filter theory, they work dependently. Go ahead, Joy.
So you said that the source filter theory, the linear one, is out of date.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I guess why do you still teach it?
Why do we still teach it? It's part of the problem that we've had, especially as voice teachers, vocal pedagogues. This gets into our first chapter of the book, which is nomenclature problems. And I mentioned before, when we talked about maybe in the first class nomenclature, what that means. That's a system of labeling things. So if you're in biology and you know all of those terms from biology, you know the nomenclature of biology. And one of the problems we've had as voice teachers, choir directors, vocal pedagogues, is we like to make up words. And we like to say, send purple up through the vocal tract. And then we always reference to our student, sing purple. Does that make sense? And we don't actually give it the name or the labeling. So one of the reasons why I still cover it is because we still have some books that you might run into where you're like, what's this random theory that keeps getting referenced? And pretty much all from about 1963 until about 2001, everybody was talking source filter theory. We had this introduced, it was given a name in the late 90s. And then when looking back, Manuel Garcia, we've talked about him just a little bit. He's the guy we've talked about when it comes to onsets, the coup de la glotte, and we'll talk about him more in the semester. He noted that on the E vowel, he noticed a change in the glottis. that the vocal folds adducted. And what do we make people try to say in the speech pathology lab when we're holding their tongue and looking down their throat. We often ask them to say E. Yeah? And it's almost impossible. We're holding their tongue and we say E, and they go, ah. Yeah? But the reason why they say E is because for some reason when they say E, we can see the vocal folds way better than when they say their vowels. So we get a change of the vocal tract based off of that E. And we talked about that last time, that often cisgender females, late in puberty, we've got what's called a mutational chink where the vocal folds won't adduct well, and when they sing the E vowel, we get way better adduction. The inverse is true for cisgender males, and testosterone-based voice changes is the E vowel then can sometimes cause squeeze and tightness for cisgender males. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions about this? So if it seems complicated, just remember inverted reactants, they function dependently. Source filter, they function independently. So we're going to talk about why this is important too in just a little bit, because we're going to get into some nitty gritty. So finally we get to talk a little bit about onsets, okay? For the bulk of our history when it comes to speech pathology and vocal elevation, when we go through the process of learning from the very beginning steps of the Italian school are rooted in training the onset, okay? And we're going to talk about this one specifically a lot, the coup de la glotte, and what some people consider synonymous with the balance onset, other people consider them different. So we're going to explain that just a little bit. But I mentioned Manuel Garcia a few times, just a few minutes ago, and one of the big quotes he says is, the way the singer initiates the sound is crucial to the subsequent phrase. So Manuel Garcia is kind of considered our forefather of voice science in singing, okay? And I mentioned he developed this laryngeal mirror. He's looking at the vocal folds for the first time. He's documenting what he's hearing, and he taught the most famous singers of his period. Then he taught a woman named Marchesi, who taught the most famous cisgender female singers. And it just so happens one of my former teachers did a family tree, and I'm in lineage with Manuel Garcia. So yeah, so kind of a weird little train of this teacher taught this teacher taught this teacher, and I'm in the Manuel Garcia lineage, so it's kind of fun. So remember that quote, because it really does turn out to be true scientifically, that when we get good adduction at the beginning of a phrase and we try to maintain legato throughout the phrase, it affects the way the phrase is sung. So how many of you had voice teachers really get very specific about the first consonant or the first onset or sound that you make? The origin of that comes from Manuel Garcia's concepts, okay? So Richard Miller, in the 20th century, reiterated these ideologies and kind of brought them to the fore when it comes to different kinds of onsets. How many of you have ever heard of onsets, glottal attack, that sort of thing? So in speech pathology, one of the big things that gets used often is this aspirate onset. And I've mentioned before, in speech pathology, about a good 80 to 90% of the patients are dealing with what's called hyperadduction, where their vocal folds are squeezing too much. And an aspirate onset is something that can be substituted in place of maybe a harsher onset that's going on. Usually when people are hyperadducting, they're either going ah, eh, e, or ah, eh, e. There's some sort of really, really strong start. So speech pathologists will have them insert little H's into things. Ha, he, he, ho, hu. Does that make sense? It's really hard to do a glottal attack or a vocal fry after going ha. This is because the vocal folds have to interrupt air that's already passing through the tube, if that makes sense. Does that make sense to everybody? Cool. And then we've got the opposite of that called the glottal attack or the hard attack. And I just gave an example of that. Sometimes it can be confused, the glottal attack and the balance onset. So what I tell people to do is listen for the rebound of the vocal folds. So if anything that has a lot of force, if it's too strong, you'll get this little rebound effect. Like if you threw a ball down at the floor, it doesn't just stop at the floor, right? It bounces back. If the onset is too strong, you'll actually hear this moment of instability. E, oh. Did anybody hear that? And the heavier the voice, the thicker the cartilages, the bigger the muscles, the more the singer can handle these kinds of onsets. You'll hear it'll sound really like a strong onset, but then the vocal folds will immediately go into oscillation, and that's okay for their body type. A lighter voice will immediately have problems when they're trying to use the glottal attack or the hard onset. And then right in the in-between are these two terms, the balance onset or coup de la glotte. Okay? Now some people argued that the coup de la glotte in its best sense is just like the balance onset. But as we've reflected back over the years, we figured out that they're very similar, but the coup de la glotte is slightly different because it includes what's called the prephonatory set. So I'm going to teach you that now. You're going to read about that in your book as well. So everybody go. You feel that closure? That's your glottis. That's where your vocal folds are. Okay. With the prephonatory set, you take a breath, and for a millisecond, you actually hold your breath before the vocal folds go into oscillation. So it goes. Yeah, if you want to go for it, ready? And oh and ooh. Oh. Ooh. There's this moment where you hold the breath for a millisecond. Do you feel that? Go ahead.
Is that like with the glottis closed?
Yeah, so the glottis actually closes prephonatory. So it's going, everyone over. There's this moment where they hold the breath for a second. Does that make sense? With balance onset, the ideology is impossible, but there's a feeling that goes with it that I want to emphasize. And this is that we have a simultaneous effort. This is what William Bernard said, the simultaneous attack. So the ideology is that you're not closing your folds before you sing, but you're trying to send the air and close your glottis at the exact same time. The problem with this is that the vocal folds actually need a certain amount of built-up air underneath the vocal folds before we can get the mucosal wave to happen. Y'all remember this mucosal wave? Yeah? So air has to build up a little bit. So it can't happen at the exact same time, but this is a good way to teach it if you want to teach it. So it sounds a little like this. It might sound like an imaginary H or a tiny, tiny H right at the beginning, but you're trying to start the sound and do the onset at the exact same time. Does that make sense? Does everybody feel clear about the difference in these onsets? Cool. So, when we talk about the way the singer initiates the phrase, when it comes to these onsets, these all have to do with vowels, right? A, E, O, U. But we have other sounds that we need to take into consideration and how they affect the glottis. So we're going to play with these just a little bit. How many have ever heard of plosive consonants? Yeah? What's a plosive consonant? What's an example? Go ahead. Yeah. Versus maybe if it was Italian, let everybody say pizza pie, like an American. Pizza pie. Everybody put your hands up and feel what that feels like. Feel the air hit your hand when you do that. Go for it.
Pizza pie.
Y'all feel that a little bit? Now put a hand right here if you do it. And let's say your choir director has said, I need lots of diction. I don't understand any of these words, people. All right, pizza pie. Go for it. Ready and breathe.
Pizza pie.
Good. What did y'all feel in your bodies when you did? You felt a little inward kick. Yeah, exactly. How many of you have ever had voice teachers say you don't want to feel those inward kicks, right? Yeah? Or sustaining it. What are you smiling at that? Did you just have a teacher tell you not to?
No, Nims thinks when I beatbox for my acapella group it's really unhealthy.
Oh, there you go. So you're learning maybe that there's something in there. Yeah, that's okay. So with the p sound, what's happening is the vocal folds actually get flown way apart, and then they have to come back together, and it can be a big puff of air. This is one of the reasons why most people advocate for training the voice on dental consonants first. And in fact, the Lempertis, who were also famous right about the same time as Manuel Garcia, they said that Italian is the best language to study the voice, partially because of these dental consonants and how efficient they are with the air. Okay, so everybody put a hand right here and a hand right here. So just to feel it again, let's say it like an American, say pizza pie.
Pizza pie.
Yeah, now say it like an Italian. Pizza pie.
Pizza pie.
Good. Did anybody feel how there was less kick right here? Yeah. So there are great singers even in other languages like German and people that sing a lot of English. If you've got a really long phrase, there are some voice teachers that will actually insert some dentals into those long phrases. If you listen to people, maybe you've ever heard of Strauss? Yeah. A lot of his phrases are very, very long. Okay, and there are times when the singer really wants to breathe, and then Strauss will be like, "No aspirate," and put a little like you thought there's a comma here, but I don't want you to breathe. So he's making singers go with these long, long, long phrases. And if you listen to people who sing a lot of Strauss, a lot of Weber, some Wagner, they'll actually insert dental consonants or non-plosive consonants into the phrase so they can make the phrase. Okay, so plosive consonants innately push the vocal folds apart, and then they have to readduct. It's like a new onset in the middle of the phrase. So if you want to make longer phrases, you want to diminish your plosive consonants, especially the one at the beginning of the sentence. Does that make sense to everybody? Go ahead, Joy.
I guess this is kind of where I'm thinking of the nomenclature.
Yeah.
The P, even with the, like without the plosive, it's not a dental consonant, technically.
When you look at diction books, they often will call non-plosives dentals.
Oh, why?
Yeah. I don't know. That's why I put both of them out there.
Okay.
But you could call it, if you hate your life saying it, say non-plosive.
Okay.
Does that help you? Italians with non-plosives?
Yeah.
Yeah, many people just refer to Italianate consonants as dental consonants in general, like an umbrella term. But hashtag nomenclature problems, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we think about it, let's pick another phrase here with some T's. Do y'all know shake, oh shake those lips away? Somebody's singing at their jury. Yeah, you did, Joy. All right, so everybody hand here. And let's aim for a lot of consonants. So let's do it on one pitch. You're gonna go, so it bases. We're gonna go, take, oh take those lips away. Okay, in that rhythm. Take, let's give it a shot. Ready? And if you wanna, ready? And breathe. Take, oh take those lips away. Very good. Now let's do it with lots of T so you feel that plosive. And here, deep breath, ready? And go. Take, oh take those lips away. Good. How many of you felt like you ran out of breath pretty quickly? Yeah. All right, now the opposite. Like an Italian, take those lips away. Okay, give it a shot. Deep breath, ready? And breathe. Take those lips away. Good, what'd you feel?
You go on.
Yeah, you felt like you had, what did you want to say?
Well, it's not gonna be a shoe part. But also, it was insane. Like the air difference was crazy. I could sing it a second time, whereas the first time I could barely finish.
You barely make it, right? Yeah, exactly. So when you're asking for my music ed majors, when you're asking for more consonants, know that you're going to have the overachiever, which is all of y'all here, yeah, going, hey, yeah, and then they're out. Then they can't really sing for you, yeah. There's also some other things. We're going to watch some videos of people doing different kinds of onsets, and there are different onsets that can lead the singer to be a little sharp, and there are different onsets that can lead the singer to be a little bit flat. How many of you have ever chorally sung the Vittoria, the O Magnum Mysterium? Do y'all know this one? And it's known because the sopranos have to come in a cappella Yeah, and yeah, tell us about it. What's the problem?
You're coming in on an O vowel, and there's like a.
It's acapella.
It's acapella. It's
like a C
quiet.
sharp or something like that.
It's usually in F.
D flat.
Yeah, it's usually in F, but we often do it in E or E flat.
Yeah.
depending
Okay.
on
Gotcha.
The
Yeah.
soprano's skill, but it's written in F minor, I think. And yeah, it's hard because it's also well sung. I've sung it a bunch at like a midnight mass. So
Yeah.
it's like 1 a.m. You've been singing for 2 hours.
And what do you normally get? Something like
Oh, hey, buddy.
oh yeah, or oh yeah. The onset. Oh, that's her pup cup.
Oh, okay.
She's allowed. She's allowed. Who lost their coffee? Yeah.
Worried
no.
he stole someone's coffee.
She got a pup cup. Yeah, I'm just trying to keep her busy. So notice what happens if I do a really, really heavy onset. Even if I try to start right on the pitch. I'll just act like I'm the soprano for a second, okay? So, oh, oh. What do y'all hear? There's a wavering.
Yes.
Yeah.
Does anybody notice that the pitch,
It's low.
yeah, it comes from underneath. So the vocal folds, when we watch the video, you'll see the vocal folds start in a squish position and have to adjust up. So many choir directors will go, okay, well let's substitute with an H onset. And what do we get? Yeah, everybody try to aim for that pitch and do a big heavy H. Ready? And breathe. Did you hear it? Yeah. So above with the big H, you're going a little sharp and having to correct down. When you try to do the balance onset, that's where we see the vocal folds come together in tune. Does that make sense? We're used to hearing opera singers doing heavier onsets though. Did y'all, that sounded familiar, right? Oh, mon young mister. Yeah. Oh. Yeah, there's this low dig. Yeah. And they're trying to get more chord closure and more resonance from those stronger onsets. Does that make sense? So let's talk about that before we get into it. When it comes to the vocal tract, I might jump over there and change my lesson just a little bit. If I'm singing and you cut off my head and I started to sing, we've talked about this, there's no vowels, right? You wouldn't get any vowel sounds, it just sounds like a buzzing 2 sheets of muscle. And in that, we get the harmonic series, okay? We're going to talk about these other resonances, like vowel resonances, that are called formants. And that's when you put my head back on, how I can adjust and mess with different resonances to help me out. Okay, let's stick with onsets. I almost changed my mind, but we'll stick with onsets. So some of you will have to give a presentation on the German group. So the Germans have 3 names for these onsets as well. Okay, and they've got that hard attack. They call it the Glottisschlagansatz. The soft attack, der gehauchte Einsatz, and the balance onset, der Stellensatz. Okay, and these all come really from the Italian school, and every school you'll notice has some influence because the Italians invented opera. Does that make sense? It's their art form, so everybody's taking it and going, how do we make it our own? Does that make sense? So they have slight adjustments.
The first one was Italian, the first set.
So these are all German words, but they notice that they all have influence on and they'll talk about onsets. And that really comes from the fact that it's Italian in origin. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
But all of these are German terms here, and they're terms for the different onsets. So, knowing German, which do you think that they prefer? The hard attack, the soft attack, or the balance onset? So we're just going to take a educated guess. How many of you think that the Germans love the hard attack? So a little stronger. Auch eine Zitze. I'm just making up words. Yeah? How about soft attack? How many of you think soft? Okay, how about the balanced onset? And some of you are like, I'm not even gonna guess. Yeah, that's okay, that's okay. So in the German school, we're gonna talk about this. There's kind of a split. We've got an art song tradition. So how many of you ever heard of the term Lieder? Yeah, the art songs written in German. They have kind of a set and an ideology. And then we've got this group of singers that sing Wagner, Strauss, Weber. And these are very loud. If you don't know, you know Wagner because of, Kill the Rabbit, The Woman with the Horns, all of that. It's usually, there's some of the loudest orchestras. They've got like a chorus of trombones, not just a trombone. And then the singer has to sing over that chorus of trombones, okay? So the voice has to be rather big, and there's a very heavy approach that they use to sing that music. So their first choice is actually that soft attack, okay? That you'll see more voice teachers in Germany advocating for der Gehauchte. And then their second choice is the hard attack. And then third choice is the balance onset. Does that make sense? So let's talk about that just a little bit. So we've got these two ideologies. Richard Miller believed that they were inserting the H to counteract the harsh glottal attack that's innate to the language. Does that make sense? All of those stops. So they're adding H's to kind of lighten off of that, like as an ideology. And that actually coincides with speech pathology. If someone's doing a lot of glottal attacks, we usually give them H onsets to counteract that thing that they're doing. Go ahead.
Why do you think they don't prefer like the balanced one?
I think that there are teachers that do, but I think innately in the language, this is what Richard Miller said is just that we're working with extremes, and so they're constantly going back and forth. And we can steal from this as pedagogues. If we have someone who's singing very, very breathy and off the core of their sound, something like Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. Sounds very familiar, right? Somebody, maybe, a developing voice would sing like that. They're using a lot of air. You might advocate for the glottal attack or explain the glottal attack, but most likely you'll get some sort of balance that's in between. In the videos that we're going to watch of onsets, I have a jazz singer who was not used to doing hard onsets. And when I explained to her, we're going to look at her vocal folds, but I explained to her, we're going to aim for the glottal attack, and I described the glottal attack to her. And when she did it the strongest she could do, when I said glottal, it looked like balance onset. Does that make sense? Describing glottal to her, who sang very breathy most of the time, produced a balance onset when I described the glottal. Does that make sense? Inverse is there too. Somebody's really squeezy. Hello, how are you? Then you can start inserting H's. Hello. It's really hard to, to suddenly start squeezing after putting heavy H's in there. One of the onsets that I advocated for, and I basically had to make it up because there's nothing in the literature, so I made up a new term. It's called the athletic aspirate onset. And I did put my article on the Google Docs, so y'all can check that out. And that's where I introduced the athletic aspirate onset. So this is using the H, but doing it in a way that's conducive to singing. So we use a lot of air in singing, things like that. So it's much more of an athletic approach to the he, he, ha, really, really moving a lot of air through the voice. Traditionally, the aspirate onset is very light. He, and produces more of a breathy tone. Does that make sense to everyone? Awesome. So, der Gehauchte is the German technique for teaching light pianissimo head voice. We're going to talk about this term Kopfstimme, and these are synonymous with what we called covered head voice. How many have ever heard of Kopfstimme, or you've heard of head voice, correct? So the differentiation in German, the Kopfstimme means head voice, okay? But we refer to Kopfstimme specifically because the Germans have a very specific sound that's much lighter than what we perceive as head voice, and this is more so referencing what's going on with cisgender males, okay? So I'll give you an example. The Kopfstimme sound usually happens in the upper middle voice of the cisgender male, or tenor bass voice, and it sounds a little like this. You hear that sound? It's very, how would you describe it? Hooty? Yeah, maybe a little bit off the core, a little bit breathy. Yeah? How many of you thought maybe that was falsetto? It's not falsetto. Here's my falsetto. That's my falsetto. Here's my Kopfstimme. Okay? Hear the slight difference in it?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I see what you mean, like when it mentions the covered head voice. It sounds like the same sound if you put like a glass lid over it.
Yeah, there's kind of a muffled hooty sound. How many of you have ever heard of Fischer Dieskau? It's very famous for singing German Lieder, and most of the high notes that he sings will have this "Im wunderschönen Monat Mai." Yeah. So what the Germans practice is actually going from this Kopfstimme and crescendoing out. And if they do it really well, if somebody does it super well, like Professor Garland does it amazingly, he sings it all of the time. In my repertoire, I sing it like once in an opera, yeah? In the entire role of Rigoletto, which is one of my big roles, I sing Kopfstimme twice, and it's because it's the death theme, and I have to sing it twice on a C. The rest of the time, I'm just hooting and hollering, yeah? So, the Germans practice it like this. She doesn't care. She's like, oh, I know, Dad. Yeah, yeah. Did y'all hear the difference in those two sounds? So it sounds like maybe if I'm good at it, that I can crescendo out and people think I'm going from falsetto into my chest voice, but it's really rooted in chest voice, okay? I can crescendo out of it. Does that make sense to all of y'all? Mm-hmm. So when we talk about the different modalities, if this is chest voice, head voice looks like this. It's just half the surface of the vocal folds, not the full mucosal wave. Remember we talked about falsetto, just these edges, okay? So Kopfstimme, very specific to the German sound. We also get it in American art song as well. These very hooty baritone sounds, yeah. And Professor Garland sings a lot of Mozart, which requires for the baritone a lot of those hooty sounds, okay? And then adherents to the Glottisschlag often teach Staubprinzip, which we're going to get into more later. But this is a breath support approach linked with performing Wagner, and I mentioned Wagner earlier. So what they end up doing is much, much stronger onsets. They're trying to get as many of those overtones as possible in their voice, and you can get that with firmer glottal closure. The problem is that some people aren't built for singing Wagner, and they try to anyways, and then they start doing really, really strong onsets to try to get those overtones for themselves, and they end up damaging their own voice, okay? So it's really specific to singing over very, very loud orchestras, and also certain body types that are built to sing that. Does that make sense? So I sing Verdi, and Verdi is the second loudest to Wagner. So I'll sing Verdi in a period called Verismo, okay? But my voice is not big enough. If y'all heard me sing big in here and y'all like, oh, he's loud. My voice is not as big as Wagner singers, okay? They're built like me, broad like me, but usually about 6'5" to 6'7". The women are my size, yeah? So usually very big people singing this repertoire, yeah? What was his name? Case? Didn't we have a... Do y'all remember Case? He was on the foot. I guess he's not. Nobody knows.
Oh yeah, not Chase.
Not Chase. Do y'all remember Chase? Big,
Blonde hair.
blonde hair. You remember him? Yeah. So he would. He's the body type that usually sings Wagner. Yeah. All right, and then we get into the French school. So the French school is highly influenced by the Italians, because Manu Garcia gets hired at the French Conservatoire, and starts advocating for the coup de grace in French. So they start getting some of those ideologies built in. The French consider the coup de grace to be synonymous with the balance onset. So you see that in literature, they believe that they're the same. Okay. A general tendency towards easy and relaxed voice production has led the French schools to be less precise in the area of onset. When you study French pedagogy, a lot of it is rooted in a cabaret basis. Does everybody know what cabaret is? I think our MT majors are going to do. Don't y'all have a cabaret thing that's happening, like junior recital-ish thing? I don't know. That's what Matthew said.
Yeah.
It's coming.
It's like our final project.
Okay, your final project. So you have to make a cabaret. And there's a lot of talking, there's a lot of crossover between acting and singing. Your very typical French song, yeah, that's a very cabaret approach. So the French, when we look at French pedagogy, we often look at the people that promoted diction studies in French. Many French opera singers, including Nathalie Dessay, will refer to themselves as singing actors versus opera singers. Does that make sense? They put the drama and the words are so important in the French language. They will transpose pieces down so they don't have to modify them. The French, in general, elevate light tenors and light high sopranos. Okay, so if you're a coloratura, if you're a soubrette, if these are your voice types, the French love you. Okay, partially because lighter voices can sing higher without needing to modify vowels. Okay, how many light sopranos do we have in here? I know you're a light, yeah. So you maybe have noticed sometimes in choral ensembles and things like that, everyone's saying modify the ah or change that vowel, and you're like, I can sing the real vowel, no problem. Okay, and that's partially because your voice type allows you to go higher without needing that modification. We're going to talk about how cisgender females modify and things like that. So smaller bodies, smaller tubes can go higher without needing to change vowels. Yeah? Bigger bodies, larger tubes end up modifying sooner and earlier. And this can be a way to help us know if someone needs to be in the alto section or the soprano section. So an alto needs to be able to sing these high B flats and stuff like that. If you're a mezzo, there's mezzo repertoire that goes up to the same soprano range. The difference is a mezzo goes up and sings it once, and then comes back down. Whereas a soprano goes up and hangs out and all day. Yeah? Does that make sense? Good.
So body types do have a lot to do with your voice?
Yeah, they do. So how long the distance is from your vocal folds to this top point right here, and also how far the distance is from here to here, changes where you'll modify vowels and how soon you'll have to modify vowels versus others. Does that make sense?
Is that part of why like so many women are put in the wrong place in choir in
Absolutely.
Elementary,
Yeah,
middle school,
yeah.
and high school even?
Absolutely. Also, we can fake sounds. We can make our voices sound rich and warm when we're not really naturally rich and warm. That could be our aesthetic. And a person listening to you might hear these rich sounds and be like, oh, that's a mezzo sound. And put you in the mezzo, section or the alto section when you should really be classified in another section. So a lot of people advocate for listening for where these vowel modifications happen. If you've got a very talented singer that can sing a huge range, can go up and sing some of these high notes, can sing the low notes with the altos, but maybe they're modifying vowels like maybe on an E natural or an F towards the top of the staff but not above the staff, that's a cue for the choral director or the voice teacher to go, maybe this is a lower voice type that needs to modify in order to feel that comfort. So let's double down, let's dig a little, go ahead.
So you mentioned like men who are broader and taller.
like, so how does that play into, is it just like general body structure?
So with Wagner, part of the broadness has to do with wingspan.
Okay.
So if you have a very broad chest, you tend to have more wingspan than someone who has a small chest and small shoulders. Does that make sense? So in Wagner, it's a combination of having the ability to have resonance. You can hear in my speaking voice I have a little more ability to project, and it's not that I'm up here going, hello, my name is Dr. Seasalts, you know. I'm not like intentionally trying. I have an innate amount of built-in resonance just because of the tubes that are built into my body. With Wagner and Strauss, they're also really long phrases. So you have to combo with the broadness, the wingspan that's there, and the tube length.
Yeah.
So you could potentially be someone who has a long tube, but a small upper body. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Or you could have all the wingspan and then a small tube. Does that make sense? We got this diversity there.
Yeah.
But body type does make a difference in what you might potentially be singing. There's some people, voice teachers, that'll see someone and be like, you look like a tenor, you know what I mean? And that sort of thing. And not to say you should do that, but you start to see the look. What are you doing, Sage? You start to see the look of someone who, well, that voice type, that kind of looks like a baritone. Does that make sense? Yeah. Good. So let's do a little fun. So we talked about innertive reactance. And let's start with cisgender females and vowel modification. I'd like everybody to do a siren. Does everybody know what a siren is? We're going to do it on oo, okay? Everybody do a siren for me. Just take a deep breath. Give me a siren. Very good. Who told you to change the vowel? Nobody. You just knew that there was something in your body, there was an instinct that said, if I don't change the vowel, me gonna hurt. Does that make sense? So let's try that really quick. So don't change the vowel. You're just gonna, you're so cute. Oops. So now don't change the vowel. And I've had some youngins do this when I used to teach high school. I have an 8th grader and, you know, but let's give it a shot. So you're gonna try to maintain that oo vowel and go up just as high as you did a second ago and tell me what it feels like. Give it a shot. Some of you couldn't help yourself, right? Yeah, I can't help it. I'm just too good. Yeah. So those of you who were able to maintain that oo vowel, what did it feel like to you?
When the higher up you got, you definitely had to like raise the soft palate.
You had to work a little harder.
It was definitely harder. Yeah, it was definitely harder than changing the vowel on top. Like it was a lot more tight, I guess.
You felt some tightness. What did you do?
I solved the problem of vowels by just like hopping off my voice at the high point. I was like,
was there like a little break, you know, or anything?
a little bit. It mostly just like went from like a pointed controlled sound to like a breathy nothing.
You had to like adjust at your glottis in order to get those high notes. What do you feel?
I felt like I had to open the back of my mouth so much, and then at that point it wasn't a forward sound anymore. I had to.
You lost the placement. Right. So did anybody notice that it wasn't as full and loud in here when you didn't modify? So that's because the cisgender female basically takes this one resonance, it's called the formant 1, and you track it going up and it creates a boost. When that boost is present, it feels good. When the boost is not there, it doesn't feel good. It feels uncomfortable. So you can see some of you were able to stay on the oo longer. Some of you are like, oh, this isn't a big deal. This didn't feel as bad. Yeah? I had to make some other adjustments in order to sing this real oo vowel. And some of you were ready to change vowels like almost immediately. You were like, woo! Yeah? You're on an ah vowel by the time you hit the top of the staff. Does that make sense? So that earlier modifiers tend to be lower voice types, and later modifiers tend to be higher voice types. And this can help you if you're teaching a middle school choir and you're trying to figure out who needs to be in the soprano section and who needs to be in the alto section. If you throw an alto over there, they're going to be modified out, and their vowels are going to be different than the rest of your sopranos, and you're going to have a hard time tuning with those sopranos because somebody's going to be having, in order to sing healthy, is going to have to modify way sooner than the other sopranos. Does that make sense? I'll show you all the science on this soon, okay? We can look at it on the piano, spectrograph, all of those things. So now you felt inertive reactance or resonance inertia, yeah? When you didn't do it, it hurt. And some of you were like, I can't not do it, yeah? So it's in you, that's good. All right, are there any questions about that? Good. So then we get to the British school. The British school advocates for the balance on set for operatic singing and a light aspirate for choral or oratorio singing. So in the British school, depending on what they're singing, they might change. If they're singing Baroque music, they might use a lighter onset. If they're singing something heavier and operatic, they might use more of a balance onset. So that's basically what these both say. One of the interesting things that I found in the Miller is it stated that in the time of the Miller, 70s and 80s, he said that these singers picked a path. So unlike what we do in the United States where we go, okay, you're learning chorally, you're singing in choir, and you're taking voice lessons, many of these singers, maybe young, might be like, okay, you're going to be an opera singer, or you sound like you should be an opera singer. Let's get you in voice lessons and we'll pull you out of choir. Does that make sense? Whereas in the United States, we very much mix it. I mean, I taught at high schools where I pulled kids out of choir to give them voice lessons. So, and again, operatic singers will use a lighter onset for Baroque and florid music and a heavier onset for romantic or modern. They're constantly making that adjustment based off of the music that they're singing. Does that make sense to everyone? Great. So now this is one of the things that's most neglected in singers. We get a good onset, we have beautiful phrases, we're singing on the core, and then we get to the end and we sometimes go rogue. We just, whatever comes out, okay? So we have what's called a soft release, a hard release, and a balanced release. Many people associate closing the mouth abruptly to be associated with a hard release. So people go, yeah, versus, yeah. Do y'all hear the difference? Now, one of the cool things about this balanced release is when people breathe in, the vocal folds actually stop in the cycle of vibrato on the pitch right before they cut off. When you close the mouth or close the glottis, sometimes the cutoff happens on the cycle of vibrato, either on the underside or the upper side. So listen really closely. I'm going to give you some bad cutoffs, and maybe you can hear that in my vibrato. Yeah. Did you hear that moment where it was like, like it gave a little, so in the cycle, for whatever reason, we're just little machines. When we cut off with a breath or we do the balance onset, we cut off on the cycle of pitch. When we close our mouth or close the glottis for the cutoff, we sometimes will be above or below the pitch. Does everybody get that with vibrato? Yeah, so vibrato, we're going up and down above and below the pitch. And for whatever reason, when we do the balance onset, I don't know why Sage is guarding the door, but that's her thing right now. She's going to keep us all safe. So when you cut off with a breath, we cut off with a sense of medial compression. Yeah, does everybody remember that term, medial compression of the vocal folds? We brought that back. Flow phonation is another word for that. Are there any questions about this?
For my brain, can you do all three in a row real fast?
Sure. So if I'll do. Yeah, did y'all hear that?
Yeah, okay.
Did you hear them all? And this is one of the most neglected. I got DMA students. I'm like, don't forget about the balanced release. Let's sing a beautiful phrase and then the hop. and close their mouth right at the end. Joy.
So how do you maintain a balanced release if you're like at the end of a long phrase and like really fighting not to squeeze anyway?
Great technique. Yeah, there's lots of different ideologies on how to do that, but one thing you can think about is like keeping breath pressure consistent all the way to the cutoff. And if that means maybe slightly changing your approach for breath support or some sort of air pressure, you'll find that you're more likely to have the balanced release when you're running out of air.
Okay.
Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that's something to talk to your teacher about too. If you feel like, you know, about 80% of the time I'm good with my phrases, and then, you know, I got that 20% where I feel squeezy at the end. Talk to your teacher about that. There's lots of different approaches, like bending your knees towards the ends of phrases, allowing some other things to kind of adjust. But these are really like the how-to versus, yeah, I know why you're here. All right, good. Are we out of time? Pretty much. Are there any final questions about this? Next time, we're going to get into all of the formants. Okay, I started to mention harmonics versus formants, how we vowel modify, why. Why do we gotta change the vowel? Some of you felt it today already. Oh, I got it. It hurts. All right. So we're going to get into it a little bit. We'll start here with a little review of all the things we do and we say. Thank you very much. Great job.
Okay, I have a question.
Sure.
So,